In this video, we will make our application a bit more complex and realistic by adding order lines and products. Also, we will implement an additional application logic for the order amount recalculation. Let's modify the data model. Now, order will contain a set of order lines, which refer to a product, and order amount will be calculated based on the quantity and price of the products in the order. The order contains a collection of order lines, which implies that they have a one-to-many relationship. The type of the relationship is composition. This is a kind of one-to-many relation that means that the order lines are created and edited alongside the original order. The order line, in turn, refers to the product as many-to-one. The type of this relationship is association. Let's create the product and define its attributes. Name, which is a string, and price, which is a big decimal. Both attributes are mandatory. Set name as the instance name of the entity. Now, let's create the order line entity. Add the following mandatory attributes: order, which is a many-to-one reference to the order, product, which is a many-to-one reference to the product, finally, we add the quantity, which is a big decimal attribute that sets the product quantity for a given order line. Now, let's define a collection of lines for the order. Open the order entity for editing and create the lines attribute, which is a composition reference to the order line entity. The corresponding attribute on the reverse side of the relationship will be automatically inserted in the mapped by field. Let's generate the database update scripts and apply them to the database in the same way as we did before. The next step, creating the user interface. To begin with, we need to prepare the views for loading proper entities to display them in the application. For a starter, order line will always be used with product name and price. So let's create the order line with product view and add the product attribute to it. Specify the local view for the associated product attribute. The order editor should display a collection of order lines. So let's define the order edit view for the order entity. Specify the minimal view for the customer entity. After that, select lines attribute and use order line with product view for it. Order lines data is fetched with an order instance, and we don't need to load them separately as we did in customer editor from the previous video, because we defined a view that will load this data. All we need to do is change a view for the order data container and replace it with order edit view. This view will fetch lines along with the order instance. Open an order editor and change a corresponding property value for the data container. Now, let's create the browsers and editors for the new entities. First, let's do this for the product entity. Both browser and editor will be similar to screens we have created for other entities, like customer. After that, let's create the user interface for order lines. The list of order lines will be displayed in the order editor, so we don't need a browser for order lines. Therefore, we will create only an editor for order lines. While creating the screen, select order line with product as a view. Start the application server and enter a couple of products for testing purposes. Now we can open Order Editor. As you can see, the Order Editor does not contain order lines. Let's move on to the next part of the project and add Order Lines browser with editing functionality to the Order Editor. We need to add a table to the Order Editor and display Order Lines data in it. Despite on the view update, we need a collection data container that will be used by a UI table component. Let's add it to Order Editor screen. Open Order Editor screen descriptor and find Collection Data component in the palette. Drag and drop it to the Order DC data container. By doing this, we create a nested data container for order lines. Select this data container and specify lines as its property field value. Then assign an ID, lines DC, for this container. We have a data container. Now we need a UI component. Find the table component in the palette and drag it to the column container under the customer field. Specify the container for the component. Assign an ID, lines table, for the table. As you see, there is only one column, quantity, is displayed. Let's add product name and price to the UI. Open the columns editor and add the following columns: product.name and product.price. The direct order line attributes, such as product and quantity, can be selected from a drop-down list, while the related entity attributes should be specified manually. Also, we need to reorder columns to make a better user experience. Set table width to 400 pixels and height to 200 pixels to make UI a bit nicer. Let's have a look at the updated UI. If the application server is running, perform hot deploy by right-clicking on Editor tab and selecting Deploy File to Tomcat. You will be able to view the changes simply by switching to the web browser and reopening the Order Editor. Now we need to add a functionality for editing order lines. To do this, let's add standard Create, Edit and Remove buttons to the editor. First, we need to define edit actions for the table. Select the table in the UI designer, select Properties palette, and invoke Actions Editor. Add 3 actions: Create, Edit and Remove. Specify proper IDs and types for each action. Actions are created. Now we need to add buttons to the user interface. In the Components palette, select Buttons panel component, drag and drop it on the table component. After that, add 3 buttons to this panel using drag and drop. Assign an action and ID for each button by specifying it in Buttons Properties palette. You can use auto-generation feature to generate button IDs. Let's update the order using Updated Editor. Reopen Order Editor screen and add a couple of order lines to the order. The final phase: implement the order amount calculations based on the product price and quantity. Open the Order Editor screen controller. Let's inject the link to the lines DC data container into the controller. We will use it to get information about order lines. Press Alt plus Insert in the source code and select Inject Lines DC. We need to subscribe to changes that happen in this container's collection to recalculate order amount. To do this, press Alt Insert and select Subscribe to Event, Data Container Events, Collection Change Event for Lines Data Container. Now, let's write a method that recalculates and updates order amount and invoke from the event handler. Create Calculate Order Amount method. The first step in calculation algorithm is set initial value of the amount to 0. Then, loop through all order lines and sum price of a product multiplied to its quantity. To assign amount value to a current order, we need to get its instance by calling getEditedEntity method. Assign the result of the method to amount property of the order being edited. The job is almost done. One tiny thing we need to do to avoid excessive recalculations. We need to recalculate order only when order lines are changed. Therefore, refresh event type for the collection should not start recalculation. Let's modify our handler. Finally, make amount field in the order editor not editable to avoid conflicts with manual changes. Redeploy order editor to Tomcat and update the order by adding order line or changing product amount to see changes in order sum. We have completed the main goal of our Quick Start tutorial. Join our community, take a look at Sampler, and consult the documentation on our website. Thank you for watching.